People think the biggest mistake you can make in Las Vegas is losing all your money. They're wrong. The biggest mistake is waking up beside the one person you promised yourself you would never fall in love with. That was the sentence Ethan Carter would repeat in his head for years. Though on the night everything changed, he had no idea his life was quietly drifting toward a future neither logic nor planning could prevent. At 22, Ethan had his entire life mapped out with the precision of someone who believed discipline could outsmart uncertainty. Law school applications were already submitted, internship interviews filled his calendar, and every decision he made seemed carefully measured. If anyone asked what mattered most, he always gave the same answer: stability. It was the kind of answer that sounded mature, responsible, and completely honest. At least that was what he believed. Noah Bennett laughed whenever Ethan became too serious. He had a way of making even ordinary afternoons feel memorable, whether they were eating greasy burgers after midnight, driving nowhere with the windows down, or arguing over which baseball team would finally have a decent season. They had been inseparable since middle school, surviving awkward teenage years, first heartbreaks, impossible exams, family celebrations, and every milestone that slowly turned boys into men. Friends joked that they were practically an old married couple. Ethan always rolled his eyes before answering with the same familiar line: "I'm straight. He's just my best friend." Noah would smile, shrug, and change the subject before anyone noticed the tiny shadow that briefly crossed his face. No one questioned their friendship because it simply existed like the sunrise, dependable and unquestioned. Ethan knew Noah's coffee order without asking. Noah could tell Ethan was anxious simply by hearing him sigh over the phone. They carried apartment spare keys, remembered each other's birthdays without reminders, and somehow always ended up sitting beside one another in every crowded room. Their families treated them like honorary brothers. Their lives had become so intertwined that separating one from the other seemed almost impossible. Graduation finally arrived beneath a warm May sky, bringing excitement, uncertainty, and the bittersweet realization that adulthood was no longer something waiting in the distance. Their closest friends planned one last adventure before careers scattered everyone across different cities. Las Vegas became the obvious choice, partly because none of them had ever been there and partly because turning 22 somehow made every impossible idea sound reasonable. Ethan packed like he was attending a business conference, neatly folding shirts and organizing travel documents inside labeled folders. Noah tossed sneakers, sunglasses, and random t-shirts into a duffel bag 5 minutes before leaving for the airport. "One day your planning is going to save us," Noah joked while watching Ethan double-check the hotel reservation for the third time. Ethan smirked without looking up. "And one day your lack of planning is going to get us arrested." Noah laughed so hard people nearby turned to stare. "Not if I drag you into the trouble with me." Ethan laughed too. It felt harmless, comfortable, familiar. Neither of them noticed the elderly woman sitting across from their departure gate, smiling warmly as she watched them tease each other. She leaned toward her husband and whispered just loudly enough for Noah to hear, "Those two are going to end up together someday." Ethan chuckled politely before correcting her with practiced confidence. "We're just best friends." The woman simply smiled as though she had heard that answer before. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the best love stories always begin that way." Las Vegas greeted them with a wall of dry desert heat the moment they stepped outside the airport, followed by a skyline that looked almost unreal beneath the late afternoon sun. Everything seemed louder, brighter, and larger than life. Giant digital billboards flashed above crowded sidewalks, while music spilled from open doors and strangers laughed as though they had known one another for years. Their group checked into a hotel overlooking the famous Strip, immediately filling the suite with backpacks, snack bags, and the kind of excitement that only came from believing an unforgettable weekend was about to begin. Noah claimed the bed closest to the window before anyone else could argue. Ethan shook his head, already unpacking neatly folded clothes into drawers that would only be used for 3 nights. Their friends laughed at the contrast. Ethan was organized enough to pack stain remover and phone chargers for everyone. Noah had forgotten toothpaste. The first evening disappeared into a blur of sightseeing, oversized milkshakes, impossible fountains dancing to music, and endless photographs taken beneath glowing neon lights. Every few blocks someone stopped them to offer nightclub tickets, comedy shows, or discounts that sounded too good to be true. Noah accepted nearly every flyer before stuffing them into Ethan's backpack. "That is exactly why I carry the bag," Ethan complained with a grin. "Because you treat me like a walking storage locker." Noah bumped his shoulder playfully. "You love being useful." Ethan wanted to deny it, but instead he laughed. It was easier. Later that night, after a surprisingly lucky streak at low-stakes blackjack and a celebratory dinner filled with terrible jokes and too much dessert, someone suggested they make one final stop before returning to the hotel. The small wedding chapel sat only a few blocks away, glowing beneath vintage lights that made it look frozen in another decade. Tourists lined up outside wearing matching shirts, cowboy hats, and plastic crowns. A man dressed as Elvis waved enthusiastically at everyone walking past. Noah pointed toward the entrance. "We have to see this place." Ethan crossed his arms. "Absolutely not. Come on. We are just looking." Looking turns into participating whenever you are involved. Their friends were already walking inside before Ethan could protest again. The chapel was filled with laughter instead of solemn silence. Couples posed for photographs, families applauded complete strangers, and cheerful employees congratulated nearly everyone who walked through the door. It felt more like a celebration than a formal ceremony. Noah wandered toward a display case filled with novelty rings, while Ethan studied framed wedding pictures hanging along the wall. There was something oddly comforting about the happiness surrounding complete strangers. A photographer asked if they wanted a free picture together because they looked like they had known each other forever. Noah answered yes before Ethan could object. They stood side by side, smiling naturally as the camera flashed. Looking at the finished photograph a minute later, Ethan frowned. "We actually look." Noah finished the sentence with a teasing smile. "Like a married couple?" Ethan rolled his eyes and slipped the photograph into his wallet anyway. As midnight approached, the city somehow became even more alive. Their group wandered through casinos, sampled oversized milkshakes at an all-night diner, and eventually returned to the hotel, carrying souvenirs they definitely did not need. Exhaustion settled over everyone at once. Noah stretched dramatically before tossing his room key onto the nightstand. "Best graduation trip ever," he said with a sleepy grin. Ethan nodded without hesitation. "I cannot remember the last time I laughed this much." Outside their window, the lights of Las Vegas shimmered endlessly beneath the desert sky, beautiful, unpredictable, and quietly preparing to rewrite everything they believed they understood about friendship before the next sunrise. The next morning began with sunlight spilling through the hotel curtains and Noah groaning because someone had forgotten to close them the night before. Ethan reached for his phone without opening his eyes, expecting to see a few messages from their friends asking about breakfast. Instead, dozens of notifications filled his screen. His banking application congratulated him on updating his marital status. His travel insurance application displayed an emergency contact that had somehow changed overnight. Confused, he sat upright. Noah was still rubbing sleep from his eyes when Ethan whispered, almost to himself, "This has to be a mistake." Noah looked over. "What happened?" Ethan handed him the phone without speaking. Noah stared at the screen for several long seconds before laughing. "That is a weird glitch." Ethan did not laugh. Another notification appeared. This time, it was an email confirming the filing of a marriage certificate through Clark County. Noah's smile slowly disappeared. They looked at each other in complete silence before both speaking at the same time. "No way." Within 20 minutes, they were standing in the hotel lobby, calling every number listed in the confirmation email. Eventually, a patient clerk answered and politely verified the information using their names and dates of birth. Yes, the certificate was real. Yes, it had been properly processed. Yes, it had been signed the previous evening. Ethan ended the call and stared into the distance as though reality had quietly stepped sideways. "Tell me we are still asleep." Noah blinked several times. "I honestly wish we were." They spent the next hour trying to reconstruct the previous night. They remembered walking through the wedding chapel. They remembered taking photographs. They remembered an employee joking that couples could choose a simple ceremony for fun. They remembered their friends daring them to play along because it would make an unforgettable story. What neither of them clearly remembered was actually completing paperwork after agreeing to participate in what they had believed was only a novelty experience. Their friends arrived downstairs one by one. immediately noticing the unusual silence. When Ethan explained what had happened, everyone stopped smiling. One friend slowly raised his hand. "I thought you two knew it was official." Noah looked completely stunned. "Official?" "The lady asked both of you several times if you understood everything. You both kept saying yes." Ethan buried his face in his hands. "I thought she was asking if we understood the joke." Nobody knew whether to laugh or apologize. After another phone call, the county office explained that dissolving the marriage would require legal paperwork that could not be completed before they returned home. Processing would likely take several weeks. Until then, every government record would continue showing them as legally married. Ethan leaned back in his chair, completely speechless. Noah finally broke the silence with a nervous smile. "Well, I guess congratulations. To us." Ethan looked at him for a second before unexpectedly laughing. The laugh spread around the table until everyone was laughing with him. It was absurd, ridiculous, impossible, yet somehow completely real. Later that afternoon, while walking quietly beside Noah through the crowded strip, Ethan glanced at the simple silver band that had somehow become more than a souvenir. "Do you think this will ruin our friendship?" he asked softly. Noah looked ahead before answering with unusual honesty. "Only if we let fear make decisions before the truth has a chance to catch up." Ethan nodded without fully understanding those words, unaware that the hardest part of their unexpected journey had not begun with signing a certificate. It had begun the moment neither of them realized they had already started looking at each other differently. They returned home believing the hardest part would be filling out paperwork, but reality proved far more complicated than a stack of legal documents. Every official database still recognized them as spouses, while the cancellation request slowly moved through a system that refused to be rushed. The attorney Ethan contacted explained that processing could easily take a month or longer, depending on the workload. Until then, there was nothing either of them could do except wait. 30 days, Ethan muttered after ending the call. "We just have to survive 30 days. Noah smiled faintly. "I have survived your terrible cooking for 10 years. I think I can survive 30 more days." Ethan looked offended. "My pasta is perfectly acceptable." Noah laughed. "Your smoke alarm disagrees." Their familiar rhythm returned almost instantly, making the strange situation feel slightly less overwhelming. Because Noah's apartment lease had expired the same week they returned from Las Vegas and Ethan's apartment had an extra bedroom, moving in together for a few weeks suddenly became the simplest solution. Their friends found the arrangement hilarious. Ethan insisted it was purely practical. Noah agreed, although a quiet part of him wondered whether fate was playing a joke far more elaborate than anyone realized. Living together was nothing new in theory. They had shared dorm rooms during college trips and spent countless weekends sleeping on each other's couches. This felt different. Their names now appeared side by side on utility bills, delivery receipts, and even the welcome message displayed by the apartment building's online resident portal. Every notification seemed determined to remind them of a reality neither had planned. Small habits slowly revealed themselves in ways neither had ever noticed before. Ethan always woke exactly at 6:30 without an alarm. Noah stayed awake reading long after midnight before quietly making coffee for Ethan every morning anyway. Ethan folded laundry with military precision, while Noah believed clean clothes only needed to make it into the correct drawer. Somehow those differences never created arguments. Instead, they became tiny routines that fit together almost naturally. One Saturday afternoon, they visited a neighborhood grocery store to restock the kitchen. While comparing different pasta sauces, an elderly cashier smiled warmly at them. "You two newlyweds?" she asked kindly. Ethan opened his mouth to explain, but Noah answered first. "Something like that." The cashier nodded knowingly. "The first year is all about learning each other's little habits. Be patient. Those little habits become the reasons you smile years later." Ethan remained unusually quiet as they loaded groceries into the car. Finally he asked, "Does everyone really see us that way?" Noah placed a bag in the trunk before answering honestly. "Maybe they just see two people who are comfortable together." That evening they cooked dinner side by side. Noah chopped vegetables while Ethan followed a recipe with absolute concentration. At one point Noah reached across the counter to wipe a small streak of flour from Ethan's cheek without thinking. Both of them froze for a brief second. The gesture had been completely innocent, something Noah had probably done dozens of times over the years, Yet somehow it felt different now. Ethan cleared his throat and looked away first. Neither mentioned it again. Later that night, rain tapped softly against the apartment windows while they watched an old baseball game from the couch. Noah eventually fell asleep halfway through the seventh inning, his head resting lightly against Ethan's shoulder. Ethan instinctively reached for the remote to lower the volume so Noah could sleep more comfortably. Only after several quiet minutes did he notice he had not moved away. He simply sat there listening to the rain, wondering why something so ordinary suddenly felt impossible to explain. On the 23rd day after they returned from Las Vegas, a small package arrived at Ethan's apartment without a return address. Noah picked it up from outside the front door, turning the weathered cardboard box over in his hands. It was surprisingly light, yet something about it felt familiar. Ethan glanced at the faded handwriting across the label and frowned. That looks like Emily's writing. Emily had been their closest friend throughout high school before moving across the country after graduation. She never forgot birthdays, always mailed handwritten holiday cards, and somehow managed to remember tiny details everyone else overlooked. Noah carefully opened the package on the kitchen table. Inside rested a wooden keepsake box, scratched around the edges from years of storage. A folded note sat on top. Ethan unfolded it first. "I found this while helping my parents clean their attic. You two made me promise never to open it. The label says it should be delivered when both of you turn 22. I figured it was finally time. Whatever is inside, I hope it reminds you how much you meant to each other back then. Love, Emily." Neither of them spoke as Noah lifted the lid. Inside lay photographs from high school, ticket stubs from football games, faded movie receipts, a friendship bracelet Ethan had claimed he lost years earlier, and two sealed envelopes resting neatly beneath everything else. Each envelope carried a single name written in black ink. One read Ethan, the other read Noah. Between them rested a smaller card with words that immediately silenced the room. "Do not open until both of you are 22. Noah slowly looked at Ethan. "I forgot this even existed." Ethan nodded just as quietly. Fragments of old memories drifted back into place. Senior year. Graduation week. Emily insisting every member of their friend group write letters to their future selves. Everyone had laughed because it sounded sentimental. Somehow they had all agreed anyway. Ethan picked up his envelope, surprised by how unfamiliar his own handwriting looked after 4 years. "Should we?" Noah asked. Ethan hesitated before answering. "I guess that was always the plan." They opened the envelopes at nearly the same moment. The apartment grew completely silent except for the occasional sound of paper unfolding. Ethan smiled at first while reading memories of old dreams, college ambitions, and promises to never lose touch with the people who mattered most. Then his smile slowly disappeared. One paragraph near the end caught his attention so completely that he read it twice. "If you are reading this at 22 and Noah is still beside you, then maybe you are luckier than you realize. Do not spend so much time worrying about becoming successful that you forget the person who already makes every ordinary day feel worth remembering." Ethan stared at the page, unable to remember writing those words. Across the table, Noah had stopped breathing for what felt like several seconds. His eyes remained fixed on the final page of his own letter. Ethan noticed his hands trembling slightly. "Are you okay?" Noah quickly folded the paper closed. "Yes." His voice sounded softer than usual. Too soft. Ethan leaned forward. "What did you write?" Noah forced a small smile that never reached his eyes. "Just embarrassing high school thoughts." Ethan considered asking again, but decided against it. Instead, he carefully folded his own letter and placed it back inside the envelope. Neither of them realized they had each hidden the most important page from the other. Because while Ethan's forgotten words had quietly planted the first seed of doubt inside his carefully ordered heart, Noah's final paragraph ended with a confession he had buried for years earlier. One simple sentence he had never intended anyone else to read. "I think I have already fallen in love with my best friend, and I hope someday he never has to wonder how much he means to me." The apartment no longer felt the same after the letters. Nothing dramatic had changed on the surface. Ethan still woke at 6:30 every morning. Noah still brewed coffee before either of them spoke. They still laughed over burned pancakes and argued about baseball scores on television. Yet beneath every ordinary moment lingered a quiet awareness neither of them could explain. Ethan found himself reading his letter again late that night after Noah had gone to bed. He stared at the final paragraph until the ink seemed almost unfamiliar. He had written those words when he was 18, long before career plans, responsibilities, and carefully constructed definitions of who he believed he was. Back then, he had simply described the person who made him happiest without questioning why. He slowly folded the paper again, but one question refused to leave his mind. If Noah had always been that person, why had he never noticed? Across the hallway, Noah sat on the edge of the guest bed, holding his own letter. He had hidden the final page beneath a notebook before Ethan could accidentally see it. For 4 years, he had convinced himself that the confession belonged to a younger version of himself, someone idealistic enough to mistake deep friendship for love. Yet after living beside Ethan these past weeks, pretending that those feelings had disappeared suddenly felt impossible. The next afternoon, Ethan received a call from the attorney handling their paperwork. The legal process was moving forward, and if everything stayed on schedule, they would be able to sign the final dissolution documents the following week. "Congratulations," the attorney said politely. "You are almost finished." Ethan thanked him automatically before ending the call, but instead of relief, an unexpected heaviness settled over him. Noah noticed immediately. "Good news." Ethan hesitated. "The papers should be ready next week." Noah smiled gently. "That is what we wanted." Ethan nodded, although the words sounded strangely distant. That evening they met several college friends for dinner. Conversation flowed easily until one friend jokingly asked, "So which one of you is keeping the apartment after the divorce?" Everyone laughed except Ethan. Before he could answer, another friend smiled thoughtfully. "Honestly, you two seem happier now than before the trip." Noah lowered his eyes toward the table. Ethan forced a small laugh. "That is just because we spend too much time together." "Maybe," their friend replied. "Or maybe you finally stopped pretending you are only important to each other because of history." The comment disappeared beneath a new conversation, but Ethan carried it home with him. Later that night, he wandered into the living room, unable to sleep. Noah was already there, sitting quietly beside the window while rain drifted across the glass. "You could not sleep either?" Noah asked. Ethan shook his head before sitting beside him. For several minutes, they simply watched headlights reflect across the wet street below. Finally, Ethan spoke without looking at him. "Can I ask you something?" Noah nodded. "When we wrote those letters, were you completely honest?" Noah's heartbeat quickened. "I thought I was." Ethan slowly turned toward him. "Do you think people can spend years hiding something important from themselves?" Noah studied Ethan's face, searching for the right answer. "I think sometimes people hide from the truth because losing the person they love feels scarier than never admitting how they feel." The sentence settled quietly between them. Ethan looked away first, his thoughts racing faster than he could organize them. He still believed he understood exactly who he was. He still believed their marriage had been an accident. Yet for the first time in his life, those beliefs no longer felt as certain as they once had. And somewhere inside the folded pages of two forgotten letters, the future they had never imagined together was beginning to unfold. The days leading up to the appointment passed with an uneasy calm that neither Ethan nor Noah knew how to break. Their conversations became shorter, their smiles a little slower to appear, not because they were angry with each other, but because both of them sensed that something important was approaching. The attorney emailed the final documents along with the appointment time. Friday, at 10 o'clock. One signature from each of them, and the unexpected chapter that had begun beneath the bright lights of Las Vegas would officially end. Ethan stared at the email for nearly 5 minutes before closing his laptop without replying. That evening, Noah found him standing alone on the apartment balcony, watching the city lights flicker below. "Everything is ready?" Noah asked quietly. Ethan nodded. "Friday." Noah leaned against the railing beside him. "Then I guess we finally get our lives back." Ethan forced himself to answer. "Yes. That is the plan." The words sounded strangely empty the moment they left his mouth. Over the next several days, Ethan threw himself into work with unusual intensity. He stayed late at the law office, volunteered for extra assignments, and answered emails long after midnight. Anything felt easier than sitting alone with his thoughts. Yet no matter how busy he became, ordinary moments kept interrupting his concentration. Passing a bakery reminded him that Noah always bought cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings. Seeing a baseball game on television made him instinctively reach for his phone before remembering Noah was not beside him. Even choosing groceries became frustrating because he automatically picked up Noah's favorite cereal before realizing he did not need it anymore. He finally admitted something to himself that he had spent weeks refusing to acknowledge. He did not miss having a roommate. He missed Noah. Meanwhile, Noah quietly began packing his belongings into moving boxes. Every folded shirt and every framed photograph felt like another silent goodbye. He had already found a small apartment across town and arranged to move the weekend after the legal appointment. He never mentioned it unless Ethan asked. Deep inside, Noah believed this was the kindest choice. If Ethan truly wanted to return to the life he had planned, Noah refused to become the reason he hesitated. On Thursday evening, Ethan came home earlier than usual and stopped in the hallway after noticing several sealed boxes stacked near the front door. "You are really leaving that soon?" he asked. Noah smiled gently without meeting his eyes. "It makes sense. Once everything is finalized, there is no reason to keep pretending." The word pretending echoed painfully inside Ethan's mind. Was everything they had shared these past weeks really pretend? The quiet dinners, the laughter, the peaceful evenings watching old movies, the comfort of simply knowing someone was waiting at home. None of it had felt false. Yet he still heard his own voice repeating the words he had relied on for years. "I am straight. He is my best friend." That sentence had always been simple, certain, safe. So why did it suddenly feel like a wall built to protect him from asking the one question he feared most? Very early Friday morning, Ethan woke before sunrise. Unable to sleep, he opened the wooden keepsake box one final time. His fingers found the folded letter from his 18-year-old self. As he unfolded the pages, a smaller sheet of paper slipped from inside and drifted onto the floor. Confused, he picked it up. It was not part of his letter. Written across the top in Noah's familiar handwriting were the words, "If Ethan ever reads this by accident, maybe fate wanted him to know." Ethan's heartbeat stopped for a single breath as he slowly lowered himself into a chair and began reading the page Noah had believed no one else would ever see. The words on the hidden page blurred as Ethan read them for the first time. "I know you probably will never read this because I am too afraid to let you. Maybe by the time we are 22 I will have moved on. Maybe I will laugh at how dramatic I sounded when I was 18. But if my feelings have not changed, then I hope I never become the reason you feel trapped. You deserve the life you dream about, even if that life does not include me the way I secretly wish it would. I would rather spend my entire life being your best friend than lose you by asking for something you cannot give." Ethan lowered the page into his lap, unable to breathe for several long seconds. Every memory from the past month returned with painful clarity. Noah making coffee before sunrise. Noah pretending not to notice whenever Ethan worked too late. Noah quietly packing boxes without asking him to stay. None of those moments had been acts. They had been expressions of a love patient enough to expect nothing in return. Ethan suddenly realized the greatest misunderstanding had never been the wedding in Las Vegas. The greatest misunderstanding was believing Noah had only become important to him because of a marriage certificate. The truth was much simpler. Noah had always been the first person Ethan wanted to call with good news, the first person he searched for in every crowded room, the first person whose opinion mattered before anyone else's. Somewhere along the way, friendship had quietly become the foundation of something much deeper, but Ethan had hidden behind familiar labels because they felt safer than asking himself difficult questions. His phone buzzed. The attorney's office reminded them of the appointment in 1 hour. Ethan looked toward the hallway where Noah's packed boxes waited by the front door. Without another thought, he grabbed his keys and rushed outside. Across town, Noah sat quietly inside the attorney's waiting room, the signed paperwork resting untouched before him. He kept checking the entrance without meaning to. The receptionist smiled politely. "Your husband has not arrived yet." Noah forced a small smile at the unfamiliar word. "He will be here." Even he was not certain whether he believed it. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The attorney stepped into the room and apologized for the delay. "We can wait a little longer if you would like." Noah looked down at the papers. Maybe this was how every impossible story ended. Not with anger or betrayal, but with two people quietly choosing different futures because they believed it was the right thing to do. Just as he reached for the pen, the office door opened. Ethan stood there, slightly out of breath, his hair uncharacteristically messy, still holding the folded letter in one hand. Everyone in the room looked toward him, But Ethan never took his eyes off Noah. He crossed the room without hesitation and gently placed the hidden page on the table between them. Noah's expression changed the instant he recognized his own handwriting. "You read it," he whispered. Ethan nodded. "By accident." He smiled faintly before continuing. "But maybe accidents have been trying to tell us something for a long time." Noah looked away, embarrassed. "You were never supposed to see that." "I know." Ethan took a slow breath, searching for words that felt honest enough after years of silence. "I spent so much time trying to prove who I thought I was that I never stopped to ask why the happiest moments of my life always had you standing beside me. I kept telling everyone that you were only my best friend because that answer felt simple. But simple is not always true." Noah's eyes filled with quiet emotion as Ethan reached toward the divorce papers resting on the table. Instead of picking up the pen, Ethan slowly tore the unsigned documents in half. The room fell completely silent. He looked directly at Noah, his voice steady for the first time since they had returned from Las Vegas. "If we are going to stay married, I do not want it to be because of one unexpected night. I want it to be because today, fully awake, I finally understand that the person I have been searching for has been walking beside me all along." Noah stared at the torn papers as though the world had quietly stopped moving around them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Noah let out a small, disbelieving laugh that quickly turned into tears he had spent years convincing himself would never fall. Ethan stepped closer without hesitation. "I cannot promise that I have every answer today," he said softly. "I only know that every future I imagined without you suddenly feels empty. I thought I was protecting the life I wanted, but the truth is I was protecting an idea of myself that no longer fits who I have become." Noah smiled through his tears. "You do not have to explain everything right now." Ethan shook his head. "No, but I do need to tell you something I should have said a long time ago. You have never been just my best friend. I simply did not understand my own heart until I almost lost you." The attorney quietly gathered the torn paperwork and excused himself from the room with a warm smile, leaving them alone. Noah looked down at the old letter resting between them. 4 years ago, I wrote those words, because I believed they would stay hidden forever." Ethan picked up the page and folded it carefully before placing it back inside the envelope. "Then I think we should stop hiding from letters." A month later, on a bright Saturday afternoon, their closest friends gathered in a quiet botanical garden overlooking a small lake. There were no flashing lights, no costumes, and no strangers cheering for a ceremony they barely understood. This time, every smile belonged to people who had watched Ethan and Noah grow up together. Emily stood beside them holding the same wooden keepsake box she had mailed weeks earlier. "I knew someday this box would matter," she whispered before handing it to Noah. Ethan laughed. "You knew before we did." Emily smiled knowingly. Everyone did. Their families laughed gently, remembering years of shared holidays, birthdays, and countless photographs where the two young men somehow always stood shoulder to shoulder without realizing what everyone else could already see. The ceremony itself was simple. They exchanged honest promises instead of perfect speeches. Ethan promised never to let fear speak louder than love again. Noah promised to keep believing in people even when they needed time to understand themselves. There were no dramatic declarations, only quiet truths that carried far more weight than grand gestures ever could. When everything was over, the guests gathered for dinner beneath strings of warm lights while old photographs played across a projector screen. One picture after another showed two boys becoming teenagers, two teenagers becoming young men, and two best friends slowly becoming something neither had expected. Late that evening, after everyone had gone home, Ethan and Noah returned to the apartment that no longer felt temporary. The moving boxes had disappeared. The spare bedroom had become a home office instead. On the kitchen table rested 2 blank sheets of paper beside the weathered keepsake box. Noah raised an eyebrow. "Another letter?" Ethan smiled. "This time we know exactly what we are signing up for." They spent the next hour writing quietly across from one another before sealing the envelopes. Ethan wrote, across the front, "Open on our 10th anniversary." Noah carefully placed both letters inside the wooden box before closing the lid. As he slid it onto the highest bookshelf in the apartment, Ethan reached for his hand without thinking. This time neither of them questioned the gesture. Outside, the city lights shimmered beneath a peaceful evening sky, reminding Ethan of another night filled with impossible surprises. The difference was that this ending had not been written by chance. It had been written by two people who finally found the courage to read the truth that had been waiting inside their hearts all along.